Okay, now we're going to get to the truth of the matter about the book of Revelation and who is the harlot. And it starts with actually kind of the Matthew 23 prophecy from Christ. The book of Revelation, among other things, is about the persecution of Christ and the apostles and the church by the Sabbath keepers, not by the Sunday keepers. 13 times in the Old Testament, Israel is referred to as a harlot. Jerusalem sits among 7 hills. Now I want you to look closely at these scriptures from Revelation 17 and 18 in Matthew 23. In Revelation 17 verse 6 it says, I saw a woman drunken with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And in chapter 18, verse 20, it says, Rejoice over her, you heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you upon her. So, God has avenged the blood of the holy martyrs upon her, the apostles, and the prophets' blood was shed by her. And in chapter 18, verse 24, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all that were slain upon the earth. Where do we find such a thing? Well, you go to Matthew 23, verse 34, and Christ is speaking to the Pharisees. Now you'll remember, and the scribes, and you'll remember that Paul himself, before he was the Apostle Paul, he was Saul, and he was a Pharisee, okay? And he was a devout Sabbath keeper. He calls himself blameless in the law. And here is what Christ is saying to the Sabbath keepers, the very devout Sabbath keepers, the Pharisees and the scribes, in Matthew 23, verse 34. Behold, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, and of them you shall crucify. Oh, Peter was crucified upside down. And Christ says of them, or to the Sabbath keepers in 34, and of them you shall scourge in your synagogues, in the Jewish synagogue, and persecute them from city to city. Well, if you read the book of Acts, the Adventists, they love to quote the book of Acts. What they don't quote is all the times the Apostle Paul is scourged, and the apostles are scourged and left for dead and persecuted from one city to another. In Acts, the 26th chapter, there's a confession by the Apostle Paul. And it reads very much like the accusation of Christ against the Sabbath keepers. He tells them how he beat them in the synagogue. He persecuted them from city to city. He talks about how he was standing there and he left all the Christians, the followers of Christ. He would get consent and they would murder. They would stone them, the Christians. He was standing there. The Apostle Paul was standing there when he was Saul, was standing there watching the rabid Sabbath keepers, like a bunch of demon-possessed dogs, go up and bite the neck of St. Stephen and gnashed on their teeth upon him. And then they took rocks and they stoned him. That's how much they hated him. And this is all was prophesied by Jesus Christ. In Matthew, the 23rd chapter, verse 37, we have, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the home of the Sabbath keepers, you that killed the prophets, and you stoned them which are sent to you. They also killed Jesus Christ. And Christ says to the Sabbath keepers, as he's talking to them and preaching to them and scathing rebuke to them, in Matthew 23, verses 35, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth. Remember that line. Remember that line, because we're going to see it in Revelation in a minute. Upon these Sabbath keepers is going to come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth. From the blood of the righteous, from righteous Abel unto now. The blood of Zacharias, the son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Can you possibly imagine? Just imagine that for a moment. Now compare Revelation 18, verse 24. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all of that were slain upon the earth. Notice what it said just right above here, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth. That's Christ talking to the Sabbath keepers, the devout Pharisees and scribes. And now he says, and in her, this is Revelation 18:24, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all that were slain upon the earth. Now notice Revelation 18, verse 20. Rejoice over her, you heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you upon her. Who killed the prophets? Who killed the apostles? Who murdered Christ? The Sabbath keepers did. And so now you know who the her is in Revelation. It is the Sabbath keepers which killed the prophets and the holy apostles. It's plain and simple. Indeed, the Sabbath keepers made war against the saints, as it was prophesied in Matthew 23, 34, and 35, in Revelation 12. Therefore, it was written by the church that God's people should come out of her and quit being a part of the Old Covenant and the Old Testament. You know why? That you're not a partaker of her sins, who murdered the prophets, who murdered the apostles, and now persecute the church, the very church Christ instituted while he was on earth. That is the goal of the Adventist church, to persecute and to make war against the saints. That is their commission. If you want to be a partaker of her sins, you be prepared to be a partaker of her punishment. May God help all the people who have ever been Adventists come out of her, that murdered the apostles and the saints and the prophets, including Jesus Christ, the Lord of the Sabbath. This is an opportunity, this is a calling for you to come to Christ and stop the persecution of the saints and speaking all manner of evil against those who have given their life over to Christ to find the righteousness of faith, not by the works of the law. Amen.